What is going on, PMs? Hope you're shipping some good stuff. Today's episode, I'm going to talk about 5 mistakes people can make when they're interviewing PM candidates. I've had the pleasure of probably interviewing hundreds of PM candidates by now at a variety of different companies, from very large like Google and Microsoft to small startups as a co-founder and early manager. Um, let's go into them. First one I've noticed is, and these are mistakes I've made in the past as well. This is why I'm able to share. um, it is possible to get impressed by logos. So if you're interviewing someone and you're like, oh, they're ex Instagram, or they're ex Amazon, or they're ex MIT or Stanford or whatever, it is possible to ascribe a little bit too much value to those kind of brand names. To be fair, having worked at those places or gone to school at those places is super impressive. And it does generally mean they've gone through a pretty rigorous selection process. And, if they were there for more than a few years, like, chances are they've got some kind of a good floor. The height of the ceiling is quite variable, though. And so be careful of impressive resumes and just verify. Second one is seeing the PM interview as a game versus a conversation. So, very common for early career interviewers is to kind of see the interview as a bit of a chess match or a match of wits. And I think as you advance in your career, you realize, like, hey, my job in conducting this interview is to try and understand and see the best version of this candidate as possible, and then match that up at the end of the interview, after the interview is done, to our hiring rubric. And so you should really spend the entire interview really trying to get to know that candidate, and really giving them as many opportunities to show you what they're capable of what their experience is, versus like, oh, I'm gonna have both of us, mix up a Rubik's cube and see how fast we can each complete it. Um, that's really not that kind of brain twister type activity is pretty much becoming out of fashion for good reason. I think we're realizing that that's not what you do when you're a PM. You're not just doing brain teasers. Number three is not unique to PM interviews, and frankly, anybody interviewing talent could probably be mindful of this, which is not re-verifying assumptions, be they positive or negative. So if you're in an interview and you're like, wow, this person's great, I've seen the logos, we have good chemistry, it's easy to then say, like, well, they're just really smart and they'd be great. And, almost go into selling mode a little too early, without really pressure testing some of those assumptions and asking, well, let's ask another, strategic or product or design or org behavior or analytical question. I know I feel like they have all those things, but I want to really, confirm and reconfirm. And more often than not, it also happens the other way, where, like, ooh, the interview's off to a tough start. I'm not convinced that they've got the type of skills I'm looking for. And I'm not even going to ask a question that evaluates that competency in a different way. I'm just going to move on and almost predetermine the outcome of the interview, sometimes like halfway through the interview, sometimes a third of the way in the interview. And part of our job as interviewers is really to make sure that we didn't get any false negatives, as well as false positives. And the way to do that is like, oh, wow, they really flubbed that product, kind of user insight question. Let me, the best course of action at that point is to ask them another question that gets at that same competency. And then if they, really struggle on the second one, then you're like, okay, they just don't have that. And now I know I've got 2 data points versus, oh, I asked them one, they kind of screwed it up, they're out kind of thing. Oops. Sorry, I need to turn off this. I'm gonna have to edit that later. Okay. Number 4. A very common problem is to expect expertise on your business. Oh, how would you solve this problem for our business? Or we're currently encountering this issue. And it's so tempting to ask those kinds of questions because you're like, hey, this is top of mind for me. I really want your help. And maybe it's a good way to kind of test the waters on how the person collaborates and how they disagree and how they ideate together. It can result in penalizing a candidate who just doesn't have visibility into all of the inner workings and details of your business. So what I prefer to do is, rather than expect expertise about my business, I would like to kind of expect expertise in their business. So I'll just say like, okay, I see you're working at this company or you previously worked at this company. Tell me about a hard business problem you had to solve, and then really kind of peel that back. Why did you guys decide to go that way? Or what were the other options you considered? And how did you make the decision? And what were the key assumptions? And what analyses did you do? And what were the dynamics of the decision-making process? And what was the role that you played? And so why didn't the customers want this? Or why did they want it? What was the problem they were trying to solve? So like you could really get into it. And when I do those interviews, my feeling is like, look, they said they spent the last 5 years in this industry at that company. I wanted to dig into their experience on that thing. And then if they are still not able to convince me as a, outsider of their mastery of those product strategy or tactical or execution decisions or performance, then, there's no explanation for that other than they just may not have the competencies we're looking for, because they should be the world's expert at their own work history. And then the last mistake I've seen others make, and myself in previous years, is staying too theoretical versus getting into the nitty gritty. So we could talk about, well, product market fit or test and learn or experimentation or iteration or customer centric design, whatever it is. And you could get a lot of answers that sound very reasonable and plausible. I think it's most interesting when you can get into specific examples and you can get past their short executive summary and really unpack specific nuance and details and trade-offs that they had to make as they were executing against those theoretical things. So those are the 5 common mistakes that I've seen made in interviewing PMs. Could also apply to other kinds of interviews. You get too impressed by logos or brand names. You treat the interview as like a kind of, intellectual street fight versus an opportunity to get to know the person. You don't check your initial assumptions and re-verify them. So you end up with some false positives or false negatives that you weren't able to double confirm. You expect them to give you a brilliant answer about your business versus giving you a brilliant answer about their business. And then lastly, you get too caught up in strategy and theory and best practices and not into like, well, tell me about a situation where this actually came up and you actually had to make some calls here. And how did you make those calls? Why did you make those calls? And that kind of thing. So let me know in the comments if there are other pitfalls that you've seen when interviewing PMs, or if you agree or disagree with some of these that I brought up. And as a plug, if you are interviewing for PM roles and you want some help with practice interviews, reach out to me on tomleungcoaching.com. Happy to schedule one, and I'll write up an assessment as if I were interviewing you afterwards, that you can see how I would summarize your performance for a hiring committee. Or if you're on the hiring side and you want a second opinion on a candidate that you're thinking of pulling the trigger on, but you want like another point of view, happy to help there as well. Hope you have a great rest of your day and always be shipping.